Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Fontanazza, editor of Food Safety Tech, and I'll be your host for today's webinar, The Ever-Evolving Last Mile to the Consumer, What's the Risk? Sponsored by LRQA. Before we begin, I'd like to review some housekeeping items. You're listening to this webinar as a webcast using the GoToWebinar app and your computer's speaker system by default. There is no call-in number. If you're having audio issues, please log out and try to reconnect. Please contact Veronica Allen via the chat box if you're having any technical issues. Today's event will consist of a 50-minute live conversation with our speakers, along with Q&A opportunities throughout the course of the discussion. You will be able to participate in a couple of interactive polls, and we encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity. You can submit text questions to today's speakers by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send them in at any time during the discussion. We will collect them and address them during the Q&A session after the presentation. You can download a PDF of the available presentation slides from the handouts pane of your control panel. Please make sure to download the file during today's webinar, as it will not be emailed to you after the webinar. And so once again, I'd like to thank LRQA for sponsoring today's webinar. It is part of the organization's Food Leadership Webinar Series, showcasing insights, analysis, and innovation from leading food industry experts. LRQA provides global leading food safety, traceability, and sustainability certification and assurance programs to help ensure that businesses produce, manufacture, and sell safe products to the highest standards consistently. During today's discussion, our experts will discuss the effect of increasing consumer demands on the food industry, as well as innovations in Q-commerce and sustainability. And with that, I'm pleased to welcome today's subject matter experts. We'll be joined by Kimberly Coffin, Global Technical Director of Supply Chain Assurance for LRQA, and Janet Cox, Associate Director for Food Safety and Compliance for HelloFresh International. You can view their full bios on our event registration page. Looks like we're having, let's see, first question to come up. Okay, so here is the first question. I'm going to pose this one to Kimberly to answer first. How have consumer expectations for the food they buy has changed, and what has been the impact on the food industry?
Great, thank you, Maria, and it's great to be here with everybody today. I think there's probably three key areas that we've seen kind of this really rapid evolution with regards to consumer expectations. Again, largely driven by really a very big change in the way I think all of us kind of have been living in recent times, but probably something that was always there in a certain level, but it's more been kind of a rapid increase with regards to expectations and priorities for consumers as they've spent more time at home. I think one, and probably first and foremost, is the definition of convenience has changed. I think convenience, when we talked about convenience previously, it was very much around popping into a convenience store, picking up a few snacks or picking up some bits and pieces. I think now, you know, that definition of convenience is much broader. It encompasses things like, I want food now. I want food delivered to my home. And not only do I want that food kind of now, but I want it to be good for me. So I want it to be, you know, the things that I want to consume in my home. I want to make sure that it's not just a prepackaged sandwich, or it's not just a bag of crisps. It is well and truly the food that I would consume in my normal home environment. Secondly, I think variety and the demand for consumers to have varieties and options has increased tremendously, and not just variety in kind of the packaged food that they buy, but that ability to make restaurant quality meals at home. You know, going back to and looking at the importance of scratch cooking, but I don't want to just do the food that mom made or the old-fashioned recipes. I actually want to innovate. I want to try different things. I want to have again, some convenience in getting that, but also want to be able to have a broad menu that I serve at home. And the third piece is one that, you know, is echoed very much by just, I think, industry as a whole, is really that we want food to be sustainable. We really a focus on, and consumers are saying, I want it to be responsibly sourced. I want to make sure that the right standards are being used for the animals that are being used in the production of the proteins. If we consume animal-based proteins, I want it to be packaged in a particular way, or I don't want it packaged at all. I want it to be clean. I want it to be green. And all of that has well and truly complicated I think what the food industry has had to focus on. You know, for a lot of my 35 years career in working in the food industry, it was principally about having really high quality food. It was about making sure that food was safe and actually producing food that, by and large, most consumers went to the supermarket and made their selections off of a store shelf.
Okay, very good. Janet?
Yeah, I think Kimberly's hit on some really interesting points there, and I fully agree. And to build on those, you know, she mentioned about convenience, but there's also about accessibility. You know, the access to a very broad range of food is now available to everyone on the internet. You know, tech has really driven that accessibility, as well as you know, providers such as Deliveroo and Uber Eats, and how they've opened up that food market to lots of people from lots of different backgrounds as well. You know, it's not just the young tech savvy individuals that are, you know, accessing those services now. And I think that accessibility has also driven awareness. So people are more aware of things around, you know, what does food safety mean? You know, I years and years ago, I started my life as an environmental health officer in the UK enforcing food safety. People didn't really know that, you know, they knew that they wanted to go to somewhere that was clean, but they didn't have all this access to lots of information now about what that means. So that awareness, accessibility has really driven consumers to, you know, and the choices that they've got and where they go. They're also more aware of quality and what quality means to them. And, you know, I think we're all living in a world today where prices are increasing day in, day out. So they want to know that they are getting value add, and if they are paying a premium, that they're getting quality and value for money, which then builds on their awareness around, you know, what food safety means. So, you know, a company only needs to have a bad bit of press, and social media now is the biggest risk to, I believe, to any large business or even a small business, to be honest. You know, it's very easy for anybody to pick up one of these, take a photo, put it on social media, it goes viral. The impact on a business is significant. And I think that is one of the impacts that you see food businesses, how they're now evolving, iterating, and really managing their food safety, I believe, better than ever has been in the past.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Janet. And I love the point around social media. I know I had one customer that I've worked with for a number of years, and she said to me, you know, the thing that actually just worries me the most is that it's not going to be me that's going to find out that we've got an issue anymore as the first person, because the risk is to my business and to me is that, and my team is that many people, if not hundreds of thousands of people, are going to know potentially before I am. And that's why we have such a focus on food safety. I think probably one of the other impacts, and I'd be interested in your point on this as well, Janet, is, you know, is well and truly, you know, with all of these kind of changes in consumer demands and all of these different focus areas that businesses need to have, is they're largely having to do that with the same level of resources. and so that it's not like the teams are growing to support kind of all of these different areas of consumer demand, and food is a very consumer driven industry. Do you have any thoughts with regards to that impact on industry, and how the change in consumer demands has impacted the food manufacturing businesses?
Well, I can only speak from a HelloFresh perspective, and I think particularly from our point of view. And I've throughout my lengthy-ish career, I've worked for a number of different businesses, but agility is one of the ones that now businesses need to be really cognizant of, being agile and being able to change direction when outside impacts drive you to, or need you to, is absolutely vital for the continued success of a business. I think the days of, I remember when I first started my career a long time ago, we'd work on a project for 2 or 3 years. That is not possible anymore. So landing something quickly, iterating, working in an agile way is absolutely vital for business. And what you thought maybe on the 1st of January when you started your year's projects will be different on the 1st of February, because something has come along to drive that change. And I think that flexibility in when you work in a technical role is sometimes difficult to adapt to. So that's one of the things that we are, and we talk about it all the time when we're recruiting, and the pace as well that business now moves at. So this isn't just HelloFresh. I think lots of businesses are moving at such a pace, and the world seems to be moving at a different pace. And I'm going to have to mention it, since the pandemic started. And everyone's moving a lot faster. Things are changing a lot quicker. People want things a lot quicker. That's the other thing. So I think I was looking at something the other day. So when HelloFresh first started, our sort of offering was, about 3 to 5 days. We're now turning stuff around in like 1 to 2 days. So, you can see that speed, and people want it immediately as well. So you've only got to look at the likes of Amazon, where you can get same day delivery. Like, this still blows my mind. You can get same day delivery on many products, or even next day. So that speed, convenience is just driving this like agile way that businesses now have to work if they want to stay at the forefront of their sector, but also if they want to grow and be successful.
Great.
Okay, well, thank you both. Kimberly, that was my thoughts when Janet was initially answering the question, was resources and how companies handle that. So that was really interesting insight. All right, so let's get to the next question. What should the priorities be for companies to ensure that food safety risks are identified and controlled in times of rapid change to product offerings? And let's pose this to Janet first.
So from our data is king. Data absolutely drives our insights, and without the data that we use in HelloFresh, and I know many other businesses will as well, we wouldn't be able to make the quick decisions that we make. So the analysis of that data, and effective analysis in a efficient but quick way. So I can't wait until the end of quarter 1 to review what happened in quarter 1. I need to know, week on week. I need to know if there is a significant risk that happened in a distribution centre, or with a particular product, or with a supplier. I need to know immediately, because we need to make a decision quickly, because if you don't, the impact on your consumers can be significant and happen very quickly. So I think using data, using tech as well, using technology, that's one of the things that I think many successful businesses that you see, that they're using technology in a really effective way, whether that's communicating with their customers or whether it's communicating internally. So the world, particularly working in a global organization, we're a 24/7 operation. Now I can't work 24/7, but it's how you then set yourselves up so that you've got that coverage, you've got the right resources in the right locations to be able to deal with these food safety risks when they happen, because the reality is they do. You know, we don't live in a perfect world, and you know, the food safety risks that happened when I was, you know, 30 years ago are still the ones that are happening now, but we're just more aware of them and we can pick them up quicker. I think we can also identify what the triggers might be. So, you know, businesses are doing a lot more horizon scanning, for example, which I think is absolutely vital to that success.
Couldn't agree more, and love the point about, you know, it is around decision making based on what the data is telling you, as opposed to that historical view, and then making subtle changes. And I think from my perspective, and looking at kind of the priorities for companies is, well and truly there's and it leads into kind of some of the stuff we talked about previously around the need for rapid change, a need for and an ability to be agile, and constantly kind of in a state of movement. And what that kind of comes back to for me is really some fundamental principles when we think about food safety risk and we think about change management processes. And, you know, we all spruik about, you know, we review our control measures, we review anytime a product or a package or a process changes, right? The reality is from an industry perspective, and looking at and evaluating change management processes, I would challenge companies to actually go back and look at what they've got defined with regards to change management and what triggers the review of those critical food safety risks or those things that can impact food safety as we make changes. How have you defined changes, and what prompts actually going back and revalidating something you do, re-verifying things? You know, are you actually monitoring from a digital perspective in real time so that you can make those agile decisions? And if you're not, then how do you actually, what do you need to do to your change management process to ensure that it is triggering, giving you, as you said, Janet, those right triggers to actually start to actually make really proactive types of decisions with regards to managing food safety risks, because they do happen. It's not perfect, exactly as you said. I think the other key piece around that change management too is, traditionally, I think when we think about change management, or we think about significant changes that can impact food safety risk, you know, it often stems back to new product development. Well, that's all fine and well, but increasingly there are changes that aren't driven by new product development. That there are changes that are defined because of process or because of what we're doing with the product or because of sourcing. And so it's really important then looking at kind of that change management process is actually taking into account what are the changes, what causes change, and how do we define change, but also who needs to understand that change management process and be involved in the active discussion around making changes. It's no longer just a technical person's responsibility or somebody that's sitting on the bench developing a new product. We need to make sure that that procurement understands it, that distribution and transport understand it, that we take it, it is much more holistic when we actually start thinking about food safety risk and who can actually have an impact on the changes that can lead to uncontrolled or unseen food safety risks to the products that we produce.
I think that's a really interesting point, Kimberly, around the change management. And I was just thinking, and I'd literally just had this conversation this morning. There is also a risk that in working in an agile way is that you don't just put a sticking plaster over something and you fix it for the short term. So you've then got to balance this agile way of working with doing the right thing for long term without just fixing it quickly and then forgetting to come back to fix it properly. So that's definitely a watch out with this agile, quick, fast-paced world that we now live in.
That's great.
All right, very good. It's so interesting the points that you're bringing out in the conversations that I've had with folks over the past few months. There's so much talk about the importance of, like you're saying, the holistic approach, breaking down the silos. Everybody needs to realize the impact of food safety. So those are some excellent points there. So let's go to our next slide. the poll question. So folks, this will be an interactive poll. We invite you to participate, and you'll see a dialog box on the screen, and you can prompt or click in which is your answer. And if you're having trouble participating, you can just contact Veronica Allen in the chat box with the response. So your choices: introduce direct-to-consumer, online shopping or delivery, extended products to new store formats, reduce packaging availability of bulk and unpackaged products, introduced reusable packaging, refills, returnable formats, and no changes made to products or distribution network. And these are changes that have been made in the past 12 months. So here are the results. I'm going to read them just in case folks can't see them. So it looks like the biggest change was that no changes were made to products or the distribution network, with 36 folks responding to that in terms of over the past 12 months in satisfying consumer demands. Next would be 27% answer that extended products to new store formats, for example, convenience. And then 18% said that they introduced direct-to-consumer online shopping or delivery. And then it's a tie between reduced packaging, availability of bulk unpackaged books, products, and introduced reusable packaging, refills, and returnable formats. And those are both at 9%. So I'd like to ask our speakers, do you have any comments on those results? Does that make sense? Is that surprising? And I'll go to Janet first on that one.
Yeah, it's a little surprising, to be honest, but I think it depends what sector you work in. You know, if you work in a more traditional, maybe manufacturing sector, manufacturing is, and I know, like, you know, you'll have MPD and, you know, new product development, but unless, you know, there's changes in manufacturing process, yeah, I'm surprised that the last 2 years hasn't driven more change in products or the distribution network. But as I say, it probably does depend on who's answering the question. I definitely think that, you know, online shopping and delivery is, you know, I'm bound to say this because I work in that sector, but I think you've only got to look at the numbers, particularly from a food e-commerce point of view. And I think I'm just going to pull up some numbers because they are absolutely mind-blowing. That I think there's only 5% of the e-commerce business is currently attributed to food and beverages. However, the market size is by far the biggest at 1.113 billion. So you can see, like, there's a disjoint between those two, and I think that that will continue, that the market penetration will continue to increase. I think I read something that by 2025 it might be something like 23%. So you can see that significant growth. So I think businesses will start to think differently as that growth continues, because people now have learnt behaviours from the last 2 years.
And I agree with you, Janet. I was looking at just a report this morning around Deloitte's global leading retailers from a retail perspective. And, you know, it was a marked increase. You know, it was like, I want to say like 300% increase with regards to kind of that online access and online shopping for those across those major retailers. And interestingly was that there was no view that that was going to change. That, you know, now that people actually understand what they can get and how that works for them, that will continue to be a key part of the way that they actually go to market when they're looking for food specifically. And likewise, you know, looking at a lot of the large multinational brands and their introduction of direct-to-consumer options, whereby, you know, the likes of PepsiCo and Nestle and a number of those leading multinational global manufacturers seeing that there's value in being able to offer their products direct to consumer by way of packaged, you know, packaging them up from a usage perspective. So well and truly, I think there's no going back.
Okay, very good. And let's go to the next discussion, question? Okay, so Janet, I'm going to pose this to you to answer first. What challenges do e-commerce and Q-commerce businesses face managing food safety risk, and how are these different to traditional food production and distribution network risk areas?
So I think the first one for us, or for me, is the speed. So that end to end. So for when a product arrives, particularly a fresh product, a PHF product, you know, the turnaround is so quick. So quality, and quality has always been important, but we have to make sure that and think about, so, you know, we're going to hold it for maybe 1-2 days, where they're going to pack it in a box, we're going to send it to a customer wants to receive it in tip-top condition because they're going to be keeping it for probably 2 or 3 days maybe before they use it. So I think quality is a big one, and then that also ties back to food safety on, like, you know, use by date. So management of products generally is, you know, first in, first out, FIFO, FIFO, whichever, you know, route you take, is always been, you know, a key fundamental in managing food safety, but more so now in that turnover, because, and I know this is a question later on, all of this then links into how you manage your food waste, because you don't want to drive more food waste into, you know, we have way too much food waste at the moment, not necessarily HelloFresh, but generally as a globe. I mean, it's something I'm very passionate about. And then the other one for me is in an e-commerce business, the product is still ours, but we put it in the back of a lorry and it goes off somewhere into the ether of distribution in a box. So, and we have, you know, millions of boxes that are being, you know, traveling throughout various different countries. So it's what's happening to that box when it leaves our distribution center. And that's one of the, from an e-commerce perspective, and I know when I speak to colleagues that work in other e-commerce businesses, that's one of the things that we have very significant oversight on, controls, requirements, verification. I mean, we do weekly verification on our sort of final mile delivery, because as soon as the box leaves our site, we have no idea what's really happening to it in the back of a lorry or a vehicle before it reaches our customer. And, you know, we want the products to reach our customer, A, to be food safe, so temperature management, but also to maintain that quality.
And look, if I could just, that's the one that resonates with me, Janet, is, you know, as you're moving food and you're moving it in all different types of distribution networks, and talk a bit more about that probably in response to one of the questions coming up, but that's just the thing in my mind, is building those confidence levels, understanding what's actually going on when you put that on a truck. And the fact as well is, when, you know, you think about traditional food production and distribution networks, and you think about, you know, loading a lorry full of pallets of product, when we start talking Q-commerce and we start talking e-commerce, we're talking smaller unit size, individual. They are going, you know, who knows, as you said, who knows where and how are they actually being managed? How are they being left? And it just, in my mind, I'll be honest, I still can't get my head around it. And I find it really interesting, you talking about, you know, all the validation and the verification work that you do, and I would expect that of a large company like HelloFresh, but that's a huge piece of what you need to do to manage risk. And it is, you know, that is a huge area that I think from a risk management perspective needs a lot of attention, time, resource, and dedication to actually really build those confidence levels. I think the other thing, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, Janet, but I thought a really interesting point from one of our previous discussions as well, and I thought it kind of resonated with me kind of when I was thinking about this question, was the fact that you were talking about the regulatory frameworks around food safety, and the fact that they're largely in most all countries, and it hadn't even occurred to me until we were talking about it previously, about, you know, how those frameworks have very much been set around manufacturing food. And so when you start talking e-commerce and you start talking movement of food, they're not always fit for purpose. And I'd love for you to kind of just share a bit in the context of the webinar today around, you know, some of the challenges that you've seen in that respect from a HelloFresh perspective.
Yeah, it's something that I know we've talked about, Kimberly, and it's something I continue to talk about with a few other people as well. Is you know, traditional legislation, guidance, certification doesn't take into account the significant growth there has now been in e-commerce and even Q-commerce, and it is very traditional. And the people that are enforcing that legislation don't necessarily understand how e-commerce works or the reality of working in e-commerce. So they'll come along with a very traditional approach of, you know, asking us questions, and we're like, oh no, we don't do it like that, but we do it like this. So what we're doing is we're also trying to educate enforcement authorities or agencies or licensing authorities in what we're doing. And a good example of this is, you know, we launched in Japan last year. And one of the things we have in our roadmap when we launch in a new country is building that partnership with an authority early on, so that they can understand what HelloFresh is, because no one has ever heard of HelloFresh in Japan. There is other similar meal kit companies in Japan, but they're like, well, we don't know who HelloFresh is. So, you know, we would build, and we've built, like, you know, this a deck and an information pack. So we will do a lot of that work up front, but I truly believe there needs to be a change in legislation and to encompass the changing face of e-commerce. Well, not just e-commerce, how people are now buying food, and that e-commerce model that is growing and continues to grow. And whether that's guidance, certification, you know, and BRCGS have done some good work on their storage and distribution standard, where they've now got a section for e-commerce. But, you know, that's a tiny part. So work is needed, and yeah, we've been having some good conversations with some of our e-commerce counterparts on how we can maybe influence that sector, because it's hard work sometimes at the moment having conversations with authorities.
Thanks for sharing that, Janet. I found it really interesting when we spoke previously. Okay, Maria, what have you got for us?
All right, very good. This is so interesting to me because I'm looking through it, the food safety lens, but I'm also sitting back and enjoying it from the consumer perspective. And I think this is just such a really interesting and great conversation. So thank you for your topical answers here. So next question, discussion topic number 5. And heads up, Kimberly, I'm going to pose this one to you first. What historical learnings from food manufacturers and traditional retailers about managing food safety risks should e-commerce, Q-commerce companies be taking on board to protect brand and consumers?
From my perspective, is there's a lot of people out there selling food now. And I think it's really important that they recognize, or even just delivering food, because well and truly, when we kind of think about Q-commerce, that's essentially what it is. They're picking food and delivering food. I think really important, and I can't stress it enough, having the right technical competence of the staff that actually understand what you're doing and understand what food is and understanding what the risks are in handling food. You know, I get very frightened when I see food being offered through kind of social media feeds. And it may taste great and it might be terrific, but it's food, and it can have a significant impact on the consumer, on the health of that consumer, if it's not actually managed appropriately from end to end. Likewise, I think that kind of builds on around the need to actually have well-defined systems with regards to how you identify and you manage food safety risks, and you actually know what those are, and you can actually, you have a system in place that actually demonstrates how you control those and why those controls that you have in place are effective by way of preventing any type of foodborne illness, or just cross-contamination, or any of those kind of those key things that actually can have a detrimental impact to the consumer of the foods. And I think when I think about kind of e-commerce and Q-commerce, and Janet, you spoke about the good work that BRCGS has done in the context of that particular section in their storage and distribution standard. You know, from a food safety perspective and a manufacturing perspective, you know, there's a recognition of, and there has been for quite a long time, of a recognition of independent verification, having standards that are actually really set, whether they be through a regulatory framework or through an independent type of means by which to verify that the necessary checks and balances are in place. And I think when we look at that storage and distribution sector, when we look at kind of e-commerce and Q-commerce, it's probably not an area that I would say traditionally has been one that's been really strong on having the right technical competence, having the systems in place, and understanding and having independent standards and seeing the value in applying independent standards and building systems around those standards that enable, if you will, the foundational elements of food safety risk management being in place and verified.
Yeah, I was just thinking, actually, I wrote down just before you said it, actually, one of the things that concerned me over lockdown, and this is where my environmental health had started to come into play, was like all these people that were selling things on food on Facebook, you know, producing like, and it's you know, it's probably in like amazing food, but I'm like, where's that come from? Like, where are you preparing it? Like, what controls have you got in place? But I think the other thing for me is, I don't think it really matters whether you're an e-commerce business or not. The approach to food safety risks should not be any different to a traditional manufacturer or retailer. The bit that I think sometimes maybe businesses that are starting out in e-commerce, and maybe even larger businesses until they get to a size where they start to appreciate that, is when the food leaves your warehouse, distribution center, your responsibility doesn't end. Your responsibility stays in until it reaches the final customer and they've accepted that product. So, you know, it's that, including that final mile, what's happening to the box or the product in the final mile. So I don't think there's, you know, we should continue to take those learnings, and we all know there's been lots of significant food safety issues globally over time, whether that's adulteration or you know, outbreaks of food poisoning. Those risks still exist even in an e-commerce business, and we shouldn't think of ourselves any differently in the way we manage food safety risk. There's just slightly different parts to the operation that we need to consider how we're managing food safety in those parts.
Great.
Very good, thank you. And I'd just like to remind folks that at the end of our discussion, we'll have opportunities to answer audience questions. So please do enter those into the questions pane. And here we go. We've got another audience poll question. So we invite folks, if you've been sitting back and listening and enjoying, we do invite you to now participate in the poll. What do you believe the rapid rise of e-commerce and Q-commerce presents in terms of the highest risk to food safety for consumers? So we have lack of transparency of material and product source, operational controls at dark stores and kitchens, handling practices during delivery, technical expertise, skills of staff, and lack of regulation or independent verification of operations. So I can see the answers being filled in live, and it's interesting to see how this is changing. Okay, very good. So 43% answer that handling practices during delivery presents the highest risk in terms of food safety for consumers. And then next in is the lack of regulation or independent verification of operations at 29%. And then we've got a tie at 14% for lack of transparency of material or product source and technical expertise and or skills of staff. Nobody answered on operational controls at dark stores or kitchens as presenting the highest risk. So thoughts on those answers? Are we surprised with that response versus the previous poll question?
Look, from my perspective, I think both Janet and I spoke about, you know, the thing when we think about it is around that handling practices during delivery. What happens when it leaves your location of production? The one that I do find interesting though is, and I'd like to probably understand, and in my mind I'm thinking about there's the cold chain pace, but I think it also can link to some of that technical expertise or the skills of staff that are actually, and who you use, if you will, in that last mile, and how you vet and those people that are actually handling, and how do you manage them. And I think, Janet, you made a great point in one of the previous questions was around, you know, the fact that not only do you do the verification and validation pace around what's happening in that handling process, but, you know, it's also making sure that people understand what they're doing and knowing who you're, you know, in as much as you can, who you're using, and the fact that your food safety system extends to that consumer. It takes into account those risks in that last mile. So looking at what are those controls that can be done to help mitigate either the people that are handling it or the actual handling processes. So that's what kind of jumps out at me.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Kimberly. And to build on that, I think that's where we also have a responsibility to ensure that where we possibly can, that the product is packed in such a way that it's protected during that final mile delivery. Because the reality is you're handing over a box to, in a lot of cases, a third party, and despite all the checks and balances that, you know, will be in place, things do happen. So it can be things as simple as making sure that the box lids are taped down properly so no one can get access to it. But the other one that I think is an interesting one is the lack of regulation and independent verification of operations. I think that we as e-commerce businesses need to be better at telling our consumers what we're doing to control and manage food safety within our operation. It's not a secret. You know, we're a food business, and we, you know, if you think back to the traditional high street restaurant, when you know, whether it's scores on the doors or you know, all those different certifications that exist, I think we need to be better at holding ourselves to account, maybe using independent verification, but telling our customers what we are doing and who we're working with to ensure that food safety aspect for them.
Great point.
Very good. I'll say, as somebody not in the operations side of food safety and strictly being an editor, I would say I agree with attendees on handling practices during delivery, and I agree with Kimberly on, you know, kind of them going hand in hand with the expertise and skills and knowledge of the staff. So interesting responses there. So let's go to the next discussion question. Number 6. Okay, so Janet, heads up, this will be going to you. What risks to food safety do you believe need to be considered by companies when making changes to make products more eco-friendly?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably an hour's discussion on its own, to be honest, but there's several aspects for me. So the first one is packaging. So, you know, there's no doubt that businesses these days need to really consider the impact that their packaging has from a sustainability point of view, and making that product much more eco-friendly. So, you know, can the packaging be recycled? Where did it originally come from? How sustainable is it, etc. But on the flip side of that, from a food safety point of view, it's not as simple as just saying, well, it's okay, we'll start using recyclable plastic to pack this product, because the impact that any minor changes have on either the shelf life of a product, the micro management of the product, the look and feel of the product, because there's still no doubt that as a consumer, and I'm sure everybody still does this, you buy with your eyes. So if you see a product that looks good, you want to eat it, or you want to buy it, or you want to make it into something. So if a product doesn't look great immediately, and the product might be amazing inside the packaging, So that has to be balanced, and there's always those challenging conversations with marketing around what a product looks like. So I think making products more eco-friendly, and there's some great initiatives coming through on the market in relation to packaging. That I think is the biggest challenge for businesses at the moment, food businesses at the moment, is making that product more that's not necessarily eco-friendly. I think is a bit of a strange word. I think it's sustainable, and ensuring that packaging can be recycled by the final consumer, and that's a whole nother challenge as well. So but that would be
look, when I kind of think about, again, that clean and green pace, there's a number of little factors, and I think if in one very small term, so whether it's looking at changing your sourcing, whether it's looking at changing your sourcing location, whether it's looking at changing your packaging, whether it's looking at durable shelf life, whether you're looking at kind of making, those subtle changes that sit under that big broad umbrella, if you will, of what I refer to as making food more sustainable, it's essential that as you're going through that process that you're thinking about, is it like for like? You can find a great answer, you can find something that's really terrific and it's going to give you lots of mileage from a sustainability perspective, but it may not be like for like. And ensuring that consumers understand that any changes that are being made to that product to make it more in line with their expectations around sustainability, that it may have an impact on various attributes, whether it be quality attributes, whether it be durable shelf life attributes, that needs to be really clear and complete when you're actually looking at making those changes, where you're trying to actually move to a more sustainable food product to offer for consumers.
Very good. Next question. So I'm going to pose this to Kimberly first. Reduction of specifically plastic packaging is a primary focus for many companies. What, if any, risks does this present to the safety of food?
Look, and this is one I love throwing around in my head and coming up with kind of the doomsday, if you will. I think the first thing when we think about plastic packaging is we need to look at necessary packaging versus over packaging. So I think for many years we've over packaged in the food industry, sometimes to make it look more beautiful, sometimes just because it seems like the right thing to do. So we really need to, the first question that we need to be asking is it a function of over package versus necessary package? And then when we look at and we say necessary packaging, then we need to actually think about what is the function of that packaging. So and what are the food safety, and specifically, what is the function of that packaging in the context of food safety risk and helping us manage and control food safety risk? Does it have a direct impact on durable shelf life? Is it imperative to actually get that product into the hands of consumers, such as ready-to-eat foods, in a fit state to be consumed? Does it prevent cross-contamination risk? So what is the functional role of it? And once, and asking those questions then brings us to a place whereby we can reduce packaging. So we can reduce that plastic packaging. In some cases, we may not be able to completely eliminate it. And I think as an industry, we need to accept that and help consumers understand the functional purposes of that packaging and why it's essential. I think we also need to think about the other innovative ways that we're looking at reducing plastic packaging, and if you will, almost single-use plastic packaging. So when we start looking at those changes in packagings and we start offering options around refillable and reusable, that then starts to actually enter into some other areas that we need to start thinking about is what's the impact on traceability of that product? So if we're offering a refillable product or a bring your own container and fill from the store, we need to think about how do we manage traceability in the context if there is something wrong and we can notify the right consumers that there's a problem with that product from a food safety perspective, as well as if a consumer comes back to us and tells us they have an issue, that we actually really can then bring that back into identifying source and understanding of where that potential defect or that potential food safety risk has occurred. The other key piece when we start talking about and looking at refillable and reusable is how do we manage the hygiene around that? So and obviously we can't control what a consumer brings to purchase, but we do still need to have some responsibility with regards to how we manage the hygiene around that refillable type of practice, as well as if we're looking at kind of returnable containers or a closed loop system with regards to those reusable containers, is how do we manage the sanitation and hygiene of those containers to prevent damage, foreign objects, and introduction of other food safety risks that we wouldn't have from a single-use container perspective. Lots of things to be considered as we're making those changes and looking at how to effectively reduce the amount of plastic packaging that we're offering to consumers.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point that you make, Kimberly. Well, the 2 points that I thought were specifically interesting is the one about reduction in packaging. So it still amazes me when I go and do my grocery shopping and I come back and the amount of packaging that I end up with from, whether it's fruit and vegetables is one actually. So, why on earth do we have to put fruit and vegetables in plastic packaging? But so I think as a, from a manufacturer or supplier, producer, we do have a responsibility to make sure that our packaging is optimal, but we're not over packaging. But I think the second one, and I think this is a good point, Kimberly, is how do we tell customers why something is in a particular piece of packaging? Because the reality is we are not going to be able to put raw chicken breast in a paper bag. And that just will not work in any market, in any country. And even if it's plastic coated paper, you've still got that plastic coating. So I think it's how we educate consumers on the journey and the reality of we are never going to be able to get to zero plastics, but actually we can use better plastics. We can improve the recyclability of those packages that exist. But then I think the other one is how do we maybe work with waste companies to actually drive better recycling of these packagings that exists when a customer has unpacked everything, because there's a big gap there at the moment as well in what can and can't be recycled, the availability of recycling plants. Even if I just think of the UK where I'm based, I know because I've done a lot of work on this in my previous role, their facilities just don't exist to take those. So we can do all the work we want to at this end, but there's nowhere where that recyclable product can go. So there's lots still to do, but I think education is absolutely vital.
Couldn't agree more.
That's interesting. Here in the States, there are some companies that do recycle untraditionally recyclable food products, but it's on the onus of the consumer to do the work, find the company, and then sign up for that service and collect the potato chip bags or the baby pouches separately. And I mean, it's really hard, and a lot of consumers just really are not going to do that. So that is a huge challenge. We do have a question about packaging, so I will leave that for the end so that we can get to the final question. So let's move to discussion topic number 8. And this will be going to Janet first. How can the food industry realistically make an impact on food waste when 50% of most food waste is generated by consumers, and is there any risk to consumer safety?
Gosh, so I think there's a responsibility. So I think from a HelloFresh and Meal Kit company point of view, that the purpose of how we and our competitors operate is that you receive exactly the amount of product that you need to make a meal, and it is designed that there is no waste. So I think it's how do other businesses and maybe retailers and restaurants and so retailers in particular, how do you optimize the sizes of packaging? If you're a single person, I don't want to buy a 4 packet of chicken breast, for example, but I buy that because it's cheaper than buying the 2. So this is a topic on its own in my view, but I do think that there's a piece around education. So how do we educate consumers better about how they can utilize maybe they've got something in their fridge that's about to go out of date? Well, you can put it in the freezer. Some products, if it's a best before, or and I know in the UK the Food Standards Agency are doing some good work around this, but it's not widely advertised around what does a use by date actually mean. Can I use that product past its actual use by date? How do I know if I can? I work in food safety. My husband always laughs when he opens our fridge, but because I've got products in there that are past their use by date, but I know that they're safe to eat, but I've got the technical knowledge to be able to make that decision. Consumers don't. So I do think we've got a big piece of work to do as food businesses to educate consumers. We probably need to do more work on actually optimizing use by dates better, because I do think that end-to-end of managing use by dates, maybe optimizing them better, would give consumers more space to be able to use a product. Giving consumers more information maybe on packaging about what to do if you've got 1 chicken breast left in a packet. Can you freeze it? You could cook it and freeze it. You could cook it and keep it for another 3 days, or whatever that is. So yes, a lot of food waste is generated by people at home, but I think education again is absolutely vital, and also this optimizing of packet sizes for the consumer, which I can't see that changing quickly. I'd love it to, because I'm a consumer, and I don't want to buy a 1 kilo bag of a product when I only need like 100 grams or something, but you're forced to buy that. So I don't think we're going to solve it quickly, but we do have a responsibility, I think, to educate consumers better on use by and best before dates and what that actually means.
Yeah, and look, you hit probably the top two pieces for me of kind of with regards to where can we have that impact, and having lived in a number of parts of the world, they have the same challenge between best before and use by date. And for the life of me, I don't know why we can't come up with an international standard and an international definition with regards to the application of use by, sell by. It fascinates me, because the reality is, in the world I grew up in, is best before relates to quality, which means it's a guidance. It may taste like cardboard, but it's not going to hurt me. Use by date means I shouldn't actually consume that after that date, because that is the end of the durable shelf life. I think building off of that from an industry perspective, we need to really think about what is that true use by date as well, because I know standard practice is we put a buffer in it, and that's where you, Janet, you and I come in, and probably many of the people that are sitting on the call have this recognition of, I know I can get 2 more days out of it because they'll have a buffer on that particular product. And the reality is, it needs to mean something. It's not got, use by is, it is used by. You use it by that date or put it in the bin. So I'm with you very much on that. And I think we've become a world of super size. And so again, going back to the pack sizes, we need to think about, what are those products that are most wasted? I love bag salad. I'm a single consumer. I love buying bag salad products. They have a low shelf life, I recognize that, so a very short shelf life, but the smallest quantity I can get can take me a week to actually consume as an individual. So we do need to be practical. We need to think about our consumers better and actually think about where we can optimize those pack sizes, we need to start looking at how we can do that.
Yeah, I think
just sort of, go ahead.
I was just thinking actually, when one of the things that I love when and I think this is quite generally driven by culturally within a country. So you only have to go to places like France, into Europe, and they are still. So, for example, they would go and buy their bread daily. I can't remember the last time I went to bar. I'd buy a loaf of bread and I expect it to last me the whole week. And I think there's something culturally, there's something about how products are purchased. So one of the things that I love is, and I know several supermarkets are trialing this now around, buying loose product, being able to take a container in and buy, well, I only want half a kilo of cereal, or I don't know, whatever it might be. That's probably quite a lot of cereal, but so I like that concept. I think that needs to grow. That definitely needs to grow. And then this will also, I think, drive some of that, not just reduction in waste, but reduction in packaging. So you've probably got a dual win if we really, really drove this.
Okay, very good. Well, we are at time, so we're not going to have time to address the audience questions, but I wanted to thank Janet Cox and Kimberly Coffin for sharing their insights with us today. Really great points. I mean, there's so many important issues that you brought up today that this could go on for another 2 hours or longer. So I want to thank you both for sharing your insights. I want to thank LRQA for sponsoring this event. And this event has been recorded. We did get some questions about that. So in about 24 to 48 hours, you'll see that posted on our website on demand. I know I'll be listening in again because there were some really interesting tidbits of information there that I'd like to kind of review. And that'll be on foodsafetytech.com under events and webinars. And on that part of our website, you can also see the on-demand events as well as upcoming events. For folks who are interested in our virtual programs, we actually have one tomorrow on food safety hazards, and that one will be specializing in salmonella. And other upcoming events include the Food Safety Consortium. We're returning in person this year. So that'll be in New Jersey in October. So please keep an eye out for that. Registration is now open. So once again, Janet and Kimberly, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights and expertise with us today. It was a really interesting and insightful conversation.
Thanks, Maria.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we will see you all virtually soon and in person in October.
Bye.